Look at him, eating whatever he wants, never gaining a pound. While I'm stuck with the boring special and can't lose an ounce.
How's your lunch, man?
Amazing. Yours?
So good.
Oh, I'm so happy for you.
Cool, buddy.
Weight loss isn't fair, but Mochi Health is. The affordable GLP-1 source that can fix your frustration with food.
So, same time next week?
No!
Definitely.
And your friends. Learn more at joinmochi.com. Mochi members have access to licensed physicians and nutritionists. Results may vary.
Generally speaking, foods that are described as being, quote, bitter tend to be viewed, well, less favorably. In fact, it's the word most commonly associated with the taste of poison. Another term that has some negative connotation is the word ordinary. The next time your spouse asks you how their new haircut looks, respond to them that it looks ordinary, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Well, thankfully, when these two words come together, the result is anything but disappointing. You're listening to the Brülosophy podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and this week I'm joined by contributor Will Lovell to chat about a style I know we both love, ordinary bitter.
Yeah, I feel like the marketing team really missed it on ordinary bitter because, again, it like none of those two words together make it sound like anything that you really, really want to drink that badly. And so, but give me something that's got predominantly maris otter, some lovely fruity esters from the English yeast strains, and I'm all in, baby. Let's do it.
Yeah, I love it as well. And, while I might struggle to fully understand why the British brewers of yore went with the naming conventions that they did, that doesn't really detract from my passion for classic British ale, one of which is ordinary bitter. I have no clue when I drank my first version of this style, but over the years, I have brewed many, many batches of ordinary bitter, so I have quite a bit of experience with it. Well, you recently tried your hand at making one using a short and shoddy approach, and I look forward to hearing about how that one turned out, as well as how blind tasters perceived it. All right, if you're a fan of this show and you'd like to receive a reward for your support, please consider becoming a patron of Brülosophy over at patreon.com/Brülosophy, where you make a small pledge and receive rewards like access to unpublished contributor recipes, unique discounts at YakimaValleyHops.com, and an invitation to a monthly live brew day with a Brülosophy contributor. I'm currently awaiting my ingredients to show up, and as soon as they do, I'll be brewing my first batch in a long time in my brand new brewery. It's been over a year, I know, and I will be inviting our patrons to hang out with me during that brew day. Should you be interested in any of this, you can head over again to patreon.com/Brülosophy and check out all of the rewards we offer for your support. Another really easy way to help us out is by using the links found at brülosophy.com/support when you're shopping online. Your experience won't change at all, and we get a little commission for that referral. And finally, if you wouldn't mind letting us know what you think about this show by leaving a rating and review in Apple Podcast or wherever it is you listen to those podcasts, we'd really appreciate that as well. Feedback is brought to you by Clawhammer Supply, who, in addition to having an awesome YouTube channel chock full of great brewing-related content, sell what we believe to be some of the best electric brewing systems on the market. If you've been considering making the move from propane to electric, you owe it to yourself to check out Clawhammer Supply. Whether you're after a 120-volt 5-gallon unit or something bigger like their powerful 240-volt 10-gallon system, Clawhammer has got you covered. You can learn more about everything they have to offer at clawhammersupply.com, and don't forget to check out their YouTube channel as well. Listener and patron Jason May wrote in with some interesting feedback as well as a related question. He said, most of your content centers on kegging and CO2 purging to avoid oxidation, which makes sense as it'll empirically provide the best final outcome. But my brewing partner Alex and I have no interest in kegging. Most of our beer travels around and gets shared with family and friends, so bottling is a must for us. You have very little content that involves bottling, and it's the one point of our relatively meager setup that I think has the most risk. I have CO2 and kegs and I'm willing to use them as supplies to aid in my bottling, but I just want to know how to mitigate my oxygen without more fancy equipment. We mostly prefer crisp pilsners and stouts and are not big hop fans. So just to be clear, Will, it sounds like Jason has at least one keg, a CO2 tank, and presumably a regulator with the necessary, tubing to perform transfers and whatnot, though he prefers bottling for the purposes of transporting beer. So what do you say about his tips that you might be able to give him for avoiding oxidation?
Yeah, I think it's a fair comment because we do like to keg a lot, mostly because we have to turn these things around pretty fast. And so when you throw in bottle conditioning with some of these beers, that can take quite a long time. Also, I hate cleaning 50 bottles for a 5-gallon batch. Like, it's just kind of annoying to me to clean 50 vessels when I can just clean one. And I have trouble enough keeping the one clean, apparently. So that's kind of where I'm at. But to answer your question, like, really, if you have like a keg and some CO2, or even if you just have a fermenter that has a gas post and a liquid post on it, you could totally just use a beer gun and either from straight off your fermenter, if it has the appropriate post and the appropriate pressure rating, you can go straight off your fermenter with like a beer gun and just CO2 flush your bottles. However you want to get your sugar in there. Either you can add it into the keg and mix it all together. Some people will do get the sugar solution and then count out how many mils they want and just syringe in how much sugar solution they want in there. The bottle carb drops, I've tried that a few times, and I don't think I've had very good luck with them. Either they work fine, or I get some kind of thing that is not carbonated and is very disappointing when I get those scores back from a competition. So I don't really like to go that route. But yeah, I think totally either put your priming sugar in a keg and then rack into the keg so it all mixes together, and then just use like some kind of bottling wand or something just to flush it with CO2 and then fill them up and cap them. And I think you're well on your way to mitigating oxygen. Or you could do, like I said, just the syringe with so many milliliters of sugar solution, pop that into whatever bottles you have. And then if you have, the ability to push the beer out of your fermenter, you can just go straight from the fermenter into those bottles and not introduce too much oxygen. You just got to make sure you have CO2 in there to offset that headspace.
Yeah. So I'm going to try to keep it as real as possible, but I only do this with the expectation that nobody takes the fact that I'm sharing my opinion as it being some sort of a recommendation that they do the same thing as me. Okay. So I've made it known many times on this show, I don't like the process of bottling beer, partially for what you said, Will. I hate cleaning 50 bottles. That to me is so time consuming and boring. And then each one of those bottles gives me like a tiny percentage of something to worry about, not going right. And I just don't want, I've never had a bottle bomb, knock on wood, and I don't want that to happen. So anyways, that's not really why we rely on kegging at Brülosophy, though. Rather, kegging allows us to be more consistent. And that's the main reason. Also, like Will said, we have a faster turnaround time. But our consistency is very important when we're trying to test out a single variable or even a combination of just a few variables. We don't want there to be some level of inconsistency like there might be in bottling, which no hate on bottling at all for those who enjoy doing that. I'm wholly of the belief that bottle conditioned beer can be just as great as forced carbonated beer. But what I prefer most about the latter, right? Kegging, is that it can be done in as little as a day compared to a week or more. If the main reason you bottle is to make transporting beer easier, I would highly recommend you give forced carbonation a shot than just pull off however many bottles you want from the keg. It sounds like you were kind of saying the same thing, Will, because it's going to significantly reduce your risk of oxidation so long as those bottled beers are consumed within a reasonable amount of time, right? So if you are bottle conditioning, though, I'm one of those dudes who still thinks that the re-fermentation that happens in that sealed bottle is enough to mitigate any oxygen exposure, at least for most styles. Hazy IPA, I've heard, I've never bottle conditioned a hazy IPA, but I have received in the mail bottle conditioned hazy IPA that was not, at least it wasn't as oxidized as some commercial examples that I've pulled off store shelves. So can it work? Probably. But I just, if you have the keg and the CO2, keg it, carbonate it in the keg in a few days, let it settle out nice and clear, and then just bottle off however many you need to take with you. I don't know. That seems the easier route to me and the less risky if you're looking to avoid oxidation, Will. Maybe I'm off on something.
Yeah, again, there's so many ways to do this, but again, kind of the tweener way to do it, though, is to put priming sugar in the bottle or in the keg and just mix it up into a CO2 purge keg, and then just kind of bottle wand it into each individual bottle and then cap it and let it naturally carbonate. That's kind of the in between of all that. But I'm with you. Like, I usually only bottle for competition, so usually I'm just trying to pull it off a keg and send it off. And to me, it's easier at home just to have kegs.
Yeah, to do a part B to your in-between version of that, though, you can also, what they call, natural conditioning in the keg or batch conditioning. So you can put priming sugar in that keg the same way you would if you were to rack that primed beer to immediately to bottles. You can just let it re-ferment in the keg and carbonate, let it settle out, and then rack that stuff to. At that point, you're transferring carbonated And if you want it to be, clear beer, 2 bottles, as opposed to having that little slug of stuff at the bottom of the bottle. So you have a ton of options if you have a keg. Dude, and just as an aside, I'm a kind of a Facebook marketplace addict because I love finding good deals. For me lately, it's been music gear, but because I brew, I am seeing a ton of people selling corny kegs lately. And this is local, small town where I live, for cheap, like half the price I was paying for used corny kegs back in the day. I mean, if you want to get into kegging, now is a good time to do that. Even if you don't want to go through the whole process of building a keezer or a kegerator, to have a couple kegs around to be able to do, closed transfers and stuff like that, even for bottle conditioning, I think it's probably a pretty good idea. So thank you so much for the feedback. If you have show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brülosophy.com or drop us a note on social media. All right, don't forget to pick up your very own Brülosophy merch, whether you're looking to warm up with a hoodie, cool down with a tank top, or just look like the beer nerd that you are. We have got something for everyone. Hell, we're even offering things like throw pillows, tote bags, and tapestries, whatever those are. We've done our best to keep prices reasonable, and our merch can be shipped internationally now. Check out everything we have over at brülosophy.com/shop. Then just click one of the product images on that page, which will redirect you to our Dashery store, or you can go there directly, brülosophy.dashery.com. There is a link in the description of this episode.
Well, the holidays have come and gone once again, but if you've forgotten to get that special someone in your life a gift, well, Mint Mobile is extending their holiday offer of half off unlimited wireless. So here's the idea. You get it now, you call it an early present for next year. What do you have to lose? Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Limited time, 50% off regular price for new customers. Upfront payment required. $45 for 3 months, $90 for 6 months, or $180 for 12-month plan. Taxes and fees extra. Speeds may slow after 50 gigabytes per month when network is busy. See terms.
There's no denying that stainless steel is the best material for brewing equipment, and Delta Brewing Systems offers some of the lowest prices on high-quality stainless gear, like the Firm Tank, which in addition to holding 8 gallons or 30 liters of work, comes with a domed lid to even further reduce the chances of a messy blow-off. Plus, it can hold up to 4 psi of pressure for closed transfers. Delta Brewing Systems also has their own line of brew kettles, as well as one of the lowest-priced all-in-one electric brewing systems out there, and their prices are shockingly low. If you're in the market for legit stainless gear that won't break the bank, do yourself a favor and head over to deltabrewingsystems.com today.
Hey, want a cookie? Oh, I know you just ate, so you're craving something a little sweet. Besides, one cookie isn't gonna kill you. How about half? Just a bite? Bite it. Bite it. Bite it.
Food noise isn't fair, but Mochi Health is. Your affordable GLP-1 source that puts you on a path to successful weight loss by quieting food noise.
Bite it!
Shh! Learn more at joinmochi.com. Mochi members have access to licensed physicians and nutritionists. Results may vary.
Having come of age in the great state of Washington, go Seahawks, by the way. That was an amazing win. One of the first commercial craft beers I recall drinking was Red Hook ESB, or Extra Special Bitter. At the time, I had no clue what this meant, and I recall thinking it seemed an odd designation for a beer that I perceived as being, well, more sweet than bitter, at least. Cut to a few months later, I had started brewing myself, and that's when I realized not only that the term bitter was both an adjective and a noun, but that it was attached to a few styles of beer, one being ordinary bitter, which has a pretty interesting history.
Yeah, I will piggyback on that and say that the Seahawks game is probably, as someone that doesn't care about the Seahawks or the Patriots, one of the most boring games I've ever watched in my life. So,
look, I'm going to cut you off. You're not wrong, but they say defense wins games, and I attach to that it also creates boring games. But hey, when you're the team that's winning, it's not that boring. So, but I hear what you're saying. No, I'm not going to judge you on that.
I got a lovely nap, but now we segue into beer. So I guess prior to the early 19th century, most British beers were dark and fairly sweet, due largely to the way that malts were canned back then, because they didn't have modern kilning methods, so they were usually kind of doing things in a way that they were going to darken very fast, like over open flames, or using other things other than propane or propane accessories to kiln their malts. And so kilning technology improved. Maltsters were able to create much paler malts, much more, which led to the development of paler beer styles. One of these malts is one of my favorites in the world, which is Maris Otter. So I'm kind of thankful for those things. And while folks may have initially referred to these beers as pale ale. Many pub patrons began asking for a pint of bitter. And this is like, I think the crux of all of this is like they asked for a pint of bitter. And I could see maybe it was more bitter than some of the sweeter things that they were used to at the time. But I cannot quite, in a modern context, this is the PR nightmare of the century that this hung around for so long, so that we now, if you ask someone if they want a pint of bitter in America anyways, they're going to, cringe because they don't like bitter beers. But again, you got to distinguish from the mild ales of the time. But man, the term PR nightmare.
Well, I'll tell you, when, anybody who's had a friend from England or even places like Australia, or you visited either of those places, I love how they have like a nickname for everything. You would never hear an American refer to their university as uni, it's stuff like that. And so it makes sense to me that these people go into the pub, after work they just have this kitschy way of talking. Throw me a pint of bitter. It's kind of cool to me that it came that way, but I see what you're saying, because bitter is not a word that most people view favorably. We'll just put it that way. What's interesting though is that, these publicans, or the brewers, I suppose, who were providing these pubs with their beer, started thinking about ways to diversify, we'll say, to maximize profits. I mean, that is just a thing that has influenced beer massively. And so what they did is they started offering multiple strengths of this, quote, bitter beer. One of those being ordinary bitter, which is the lowest ABV base level offering. Some people refer to it as just bitter, or standard bitter is one that's used. Now, while ordinary bitter was already the least strong version, the ABV that we associate with it today is actually lower than what it originally was. And that was driven down by government restrictions on alcohol, as well as the impact of both world wars, which had a economical impact on several countries who were involved in those wars. So,
yeah, I also think what's interesting too is because the ordinary bitter, best bitter, ESB, like whenever I was in London and the UK and I ordered a pint of bitter on cask, I don't know that they're ever really that specified. Like the BJCP goes and they get real specific with it, but I don't remember ever, like I couldn't have told you if I ordered an ESB or a best or an ordinary based off of what I was ordering at the pub, because it's just a cask ale.
Exactly.
And you're just ordering it on cask, and like really it's just pint of bitter is about as good as you're going to get, because that's what they're going to give you, a pint of bitter that's on cask, and it really is an amazing experience. And then also backstory, the reason we're going to talk about my tries at an ordinary bitter was because I asked initially for a best bitter, and Martin had already brewed one. And so I literally just said, "Oh, not a big deal. I'll just lessen the strength and we'll be good to go."
There you go. Exactly. Well, and that's the thing too. You think about this delineation that we have created, or the BJCP has created. The BJCP has a lot of influence on the way people, or brewers at least, think about beer, or beer styles at the very least. And that it does not necessarily mean that they're pulling it directly from the brewing tradition of the places where these beer styles originated. And I think even Gordon Strong would admit to that. What they're doing is saying, hey, look, there are these different versions of this that we've sampled. Let's break it down so that people can have a more precise thing to submit, a category to submit our beers under for competition. I mean, that's what the BJCP is. It's the, beer judge certification program. You are a beer judge. So they're really trying to just make it conducive to competition, which I'm cool with that. But I'm with you. I've been to, I've been to the UK, I've been to Scotland, I've been to Ireland, and I never once saw in any of the pubs ordinary, best, and ESB. It was always just bitter, and that's how you ordered it. This style overall, bitter, right? All three of those, I suppose, became so well liked that it apparently replaced mild ale as the national drink of England. So I think that's pretty cool that bitter now is kind of the style of ale that is associated the most with England, even though mild was around before it. And again, it's just less roasty, maybe a little bit more balanced in terms of sweetness and bitterness. So I am cool with that. Now, speaking of the BJCP, they provide the following description of ordinary bitter. As a low gravity alcohol and carbonation, make this an easy drinking session beer. The malt profile can vary in flavor and intensity, but should never override the overall bitter impression. Drinkability is a critical component of the style. I mean, that's a pretty basic description, if you ask me.
Right. I think the The one caveat here is it says overall bitter impression in this style, and I just want to say the caveat there is that yes, there is an impression of bitterness, but not in the way that you think of a pale ale or an IPA, you know, in any of those. And so I think where dear judges that have judged my beers in the past, just take note of that.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's funny that bitter is the focus because of the name in part, but it really is not like a bitter beer. If you live in the United States and you've had an American pale ale, you have had a beer that is far more perceptibly bitter than ordinary bitter. So, all right, style description. We're just going to read through the BJCP guidelines here. For appearance: pale amber to light copper color, good to brilliant clarity, low to moderate, white to off-white head. It may have very little head due to low carbonation. How about aroma, Will?
Aroma is low to moderate malt aroma, often, but not always, with a light caramel complexity, quality. Bready, biscuity, or light toasty malty complexity is common. I just want to say that bready, biscuity, or lightly toast malt complexity is common. Is going to be a theme here.
It's key, yes.
And if you judge these beers ever in a BJCP setting and you don't get those things, then it probably is in the wrong category. Mild to moderate fruitiness. Hop aroma can range from moderate to none, typically with floral, earthy, resiny, or fruity character. Generally no diacetyl, although very low levels are allowed.
No, thank you. I don't want any of that in there. That's just my opinion on it. Flavor, you're looking for medium to moderately high bitterness, moderately low to moderately high fruity esters, moderate to low hop flavor, typically with an earthy, resiny, fruity, or floral character, low to medium maltiness with a dry finish. The malt profile is typically bready, biscuity, or lightly toasty. Like you said, Will, it's going to show up a lot. Low to moderate caramel or toffee flavors are optional. Balance is often decidedly bitter, although the bitterness should not completely overpower the malt flavor, esters, and hop flavor. That is essential in my opinion. And generally a no diacetyl in the flavor, although very low levels, it says, are allowed. Again, the diacetyl thing is just because the yeasts that are used are known for producing a little bit more, diacetyl than say clean American yeast. But if you're doing it right, it's very easy to avoid that gross buttery kind of waxy feeling in your mouth. So don't go there.
Man, when you combine that like bready, biscuity, toasty flavor with those like just subtle fruity esters that you can get from those English yeast strains, it is just such a money beer to drink. I remember it's been a couple of years, but I judged a whole flight of these, and you're just like, give me the biscuity, toasty, and then all these fun little esters, and you're just like, along with a little bit of a, maybe an earthy hop in the background, and man, it is just a recipe for amazingness. So the mouthfeel, light to medium, light body, low carbonation, although bottled examples can have moderate carbonation. So you want low carbonation in this beer typically, or low to medium low, I guess, just to make sure that you can get more accent. It kind of helps accentuate some of those malt characteristics and keep that carbonic acid kind of out of the way.
Yeah. The low carbonation I know really gets a lot of people there. If you talk to anybody, my father-in-law is a perfect example. He spent a couple years in England when he was in the Air Force back during, Vietnam and all that stuff. And, he's like, God, that English beer, they serve it warm and not carbonated. And I'm like, well, that's not really the truth. It is not warm. It's cellar temperature, which is like 52 degrees Fahrenheit. I think that's like 11 C. And it is low carb, but part of the reason for that is the way that they serve it. And I think that's an important factor, that they're oftentimes pumping it up through a beer engine and then through a sparkler, which is going to push out a lot of that, whatever CO2 is in there. But it really does. You don't have to drink it that way, but if you do, in my opinion, it really does add to the experience. I've come to really love that. But when I'm making my own, I carbonate it like a normal beer because carbonation is one of the easiest things to control after the fact, right? You can't add carbonation in the glass, but you can certainly knock some out. So that's not one that I would recommend anybody worry too much about.
So there's a really cool brewery in Denver called Hogshead, if y'all haven't been there, and they have lots of cask ales. And so I highly recommend, if you like English ales, to go there. But one of the cool things you can do there at the brewery is they have CO2 tap and cask side by side. And so you could potentially order 2 pints of bitter and just like try them side by side with CO2 carbonated versus cask ale. And it is different. it does hit different. They're both delicious, but it definitely does hit different.
Absolutely. I've not been to Hogshead, but I've heard so much about it, and I will absolutely be making it, or it'll be on my list of breweries to visit next time we head to Denver. So, well, generally speaking, bitter is brewed with a focus on early kettle additions as opposed to aggressive middle and late hopping. That's just a note that the BJCP makes. And, you think about it, yeah, this is not a hop-forward beer by any means. It is a bitter-forward beer, but in the context of old school mild, right? So it's not an IPA. It is not a pale ale. It is a balanced malty and bitterness beer that, in my opinion, it just works insanely well. So in terms of the vital stats, again, this is prescribed by the BJCP, which we appreciate that they put this together to try to make a cohesive guideline for us to brew to if we're brewing for competition. They say that ordinary bitter should be between 1030 and 1039 OG with a finishing gravity of 1007 to 1011 for a final ABV of between 3.2 and 3.8% ABV. IBU range between 25 and 35 IBU. So there you have it. I mean, that is not low IBU, but it's enough to balance the sweetness from that malt. And then color-wise, you're looking at 8 to 14 SRM.
Yeah, and you're going to want some of that IBU in there because, again, your grain bill is going to be mostly a pale ale malt like Maris Otter, but you're also going to have those amber malts and crystal malts in there as well. And so that bitterness from that can kind of balance out some of that crystal malt sweetness that people don't care for. And then you can also use dark malts like a chocolate malt or something just for a touch of color adjustment just to get the color that you want. But again, the Maris Otter to me here is the star with a side of crystal malt.
Yeah, without a doubt. The crystal malt, people have come to hate the crystal malts, I think mostly because people like us say that we hate it. We don't say it, but I know that there are other, podcasters and such out there who just shit all over crystal malts all the time. They have a place, and ordinary bitter is one of those places, in my opinion. What's interesting is the inclusion of amber malt. I have never used, as far as I know at least, I've never used amber malt. That's just one of those. I've used brown malt, which I guess is kind of the older brother of like amber malt. But yeah, I've never used it. I have no idea how it tastes. I can kind of envision what it might do to a beer. So if you've used it and you have an ordinary bitter you want me to try, feel free to send it my way. In terms of adjuncts, corn, sugar, wheat, those are all appropriate in smaller amounts. I think that, you consider the time frame within which this style was being developed, it was probably cheaper to utilize those things just to boost the alcohol a little bit. To me, though, I wouldn't ever use wheat. Maybe I don't have any issue with wheat, if I'm including it in the grain bill. But corn and sugar aren't really going to add much to this already low ABV beer. And in my mind, at least, it runs a risk of creating like a thinner beer than I would want. I don't know.
Yeah, I think part of that is just a nod back to tradition of like probably there was a time maybe during World War II and some other spots where maybe you didn't have as much barley available to use. And so, using a little adjunct in there just to get it to where you need it to be, probably perfectly acceptable in the times of war. That's just kind of my guess. I don't know that for a fact, but it would be interesting to go back and read the history of the style a little bit more and see if my guess is appropriate or not. Hops, classic English hop varieties. I Heart Fuggles is probably one of the big ones. You could also use some EKG, some East Kent Goldings. But, Challenger, Target, Northtown, Northern Brewer, Bramlin Cross, Progress, all those would probably fit in there just pretty well. But there's a lot of, but again, hops aren't really the star of the show here. But they can add a little bit of complexity on a very subtle complexity on a beer that's kind of, not a lot there. It's a 3.8% beer. So it can add a little bit to it.
Yeah. When I think about the hop quality, not the bitterness necessarily, but the hop flavor and aroma quality of an ordinary bitter, to me, it's almost like the hops are there as this like subtle umami just to add that richness, something else, some complexity to it. I've gotten a Willamette is a Fuggles offshoot that is a domestic, United States hop variety. It's been around for a very long time. It's an excellent hop variety that's very cheap. If you want to get your hands on some Willamette and make an ordinary bitter with it, you probably wouldn't be able to tell it apart from one made with Fuggles. So in terms of yeast, I think this is pretty obvious as well. You're going to use a classic British ale yeast strain. That would be something like the Fuller strain, which goes by Imperial Yeast A09 Pub, White Labs WLP 002 English Ale, or Y Yeast 1968. Whitbread Dry is another common strain. This one does have the tendency to attenuate a little bit more, but it works really well if you're managing your mash temps and stuff properly. That would be Imperial Yeast A01 House, White Labs WLP 007 Dry English, Y Yeast 1098, and even Safale SO4, I believe, is the Whitbread Dry strain. Other options, Y Yeast 1318 London Ale 3, which I know you hear that and you're like, oh, that's the hazy IPA yeast. Yeah, it works great for hazy IPA, but it's also an excellent yeast for these classic British bitters. And I've actually used one in an ordinary bitter, and it was not hazy at all. It dropped perfectly clear. That also is, I believe, Imperial Yeast has that one as juice, if I'm not mistaken. You've got other options like White Labs WLP 013, Newcastle Ale, or Lowbrew's Nottingham. They also have, Lowbrew has their Windsor. I'm not the biggest fan of either of those yeast strains. I feel like Nottingham, maybe I'm just using it wrong, but it creates this kind of sharpness that doesn't really please me very much. And then Windsor, I always get like a hint of isoamyl acetate, like a little banana thing from that yeast. But I know people who swear by both of those strains, so you have plenty of options.
Yeah, I think the yeast is like kind of a really nice thing here because as I kind of commented earlier, those fruity esters that you're getting into are kind of these just like subtle things that just kind of add some depth of character, depth of flavor. I really like Fuller's. But Whitbread would also work perfectly fine for me as well. But Fuller's does a really great job of kind of accentuating the malt and, depending on how you treat it, give you a nice subtle ester profile.
Absolutely. Fuller's is my favorite too. It's my go-to for most classic British ale, but also a lot of classic American, hoppy beers like American IPA. I think it works insanely well. My understanding is that the Fuller strain is what Firestone Walker uses for Union Jack. So if they're cool with it, so am I. We're going to move into the brewing process and some details there. The first thing we'll hit on is water chemistry. You can get away with a lot with ordinary bitter. I don't think there's a hard, you must have water that looks like this, but there's recommendations that it should be moderately hard, meaning with slightly higher sulfate than chloride, like a 2-to-1 ratio, just to sharpen that hop bitterness, because that is kind of the feature of this style. But a balanced profile works just as well. If if you're going 35 ppm of both sulfate and chloride, you're going to be fine with the turnout. Just know that if you want more of that malt warmth, that's how I describe it at least, you can go a little bit higher chloride. If you really want to accentuate that crispness from the hop bitterness, go a little bit higher sulfate. It's a pretty easy one to adjust.
Well, and I wonder how much of the bitterness or perceived bitterness from this style does come from some of the water chemistry. And so it may be something that's a great lever to play with to kind of get dialed in where you want to go. But I would probably favor sulfate over chloride just to kind of accentuate that little bit of, bite that you might get from the water chemistry aspect of it. To me, that seems pretty important. For the mash, it's pretty simple. You're going to go 60 minutes around 152 to 156 Fahrenheit, which is 67 to 69 C. Pretty straightforward. Nothing crazy going on there.
Absolutely. And then you're going to boil for another 60 minutes just to drive off DMS and achieve, that isomerization of the alpha acids so that you get the bitterness that is required in a bitter. Once the boil's over, you're going to quickly chill it just to ensure a good cold break and then transfer as little trub as possible to the fermentation vessel. And then you're going to ferment it at standard ale temperatures. I think for English, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this. I remember when I was, starting to get into English beer brewing, which, by the way, very, very fun one for new brewers to get into because you can't find these beers and they're not terribly difficult to make. It's not like brewing a Pilsner or anything. But I remember being told, oh yeah, it's an ale. You can go up to 72 degrees Fahrenheit, which is like, I don't know, between 21 and 23 degrees. Most people would just say room temp or 68 degrees Fahrenheit or, 20 C. I just ferment everything at 66 C these days, or 66 Fahrenheit or 19 C. So there's a fairly decent range there. I don't think you're going to have bad results if you ferment an ordinary bitter at 72 degrees Fahrenheit, though.
No, I think the thing, though, is the esters can get out of control if you go a bit too warm. So I usually do most everything at 66 F. I've gone cooler one time and it didn't quite ferment all the way out. It still made a delicious beer, but I wouldn't go much below 66F. And then I usually like to warm it up like, a couple of days into fermentation after it kind of kicks off. I'll usually warm it up to about 68 and then 70 and just try to ramp it up over time just to make sure that it attenuates out and you don't get into that funky diacetyl in there.
Yeah, that I was going to say that diacetyl rest, even though it's only 2 to 3 degrees Fahrenheit difference, just go with it. Unless you want that subtle buttery thing. I've skipped diacetyl rest and not gotten diacetyl, and I think part of that is that the yeast we're using nowadays is just so robust. It's that the labs are producing such strong, viable yeast that we're just pitching directly even, and that's going to take care of most of the diacetyl anyways. So, okay, once it's done fermenting, you can find this beer, but only with isinglass, of course, because it is a traditional English beer. That's obviously not true, but that would have been the way that they did it back in the day, right?
Yeah, I do love my fish bladder, so,
I feel like we just talked about this, yeah.
Oh, man, it's flashbacks. But packaging, carbonation, serving, like traditionally you would cask condition this thing and serve it on a beer engine with a sparkler, and Lord knows I don't have one of those in my garage, so you probably can force carbonate it or naturally condition it. Again, kind of on that low to moderate side but it's your beer. So if you want a high carbonated ordinary bitter, then do it. But most people are expecting a moderate to lower than that style for their carbonation.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I carbonate almost all of my beers to the exacts. It's funny because I'm a big fan of secondary regulators for keezers and kegerators. Be able to you can put whatever you want. The only reason I like secondary kegerators or regulators is because they allow you to force carb or burst carbonate one batch while the other one is being served. I carbonate all of my beer to the same level. And I go pretty high because, again, the way you pour it is going to knock some out. The way you treat it when it's in the glass, you can knock some out. To me, that's just give people the option. And so it doesn't need to be exactly how you want it right when you pour it off the tap. So, but yeah, lower to moderate carbonation. I like to do that little trick I've talked about with the baby, medicine syringe where you fill half of it up with air, you fill half of it up with beer, then you blast it down to the bottom of your glass and you get a nice creamy head. It's almost like a fake, or a hybrid or mock nitrogen serving little tip there. So what to look for in a good example of this style? You want pronounced bready or biscuity malt backbone that supports a firm, earthy hop bitterness and subtle fruity esters. Despite its low alcohol content, it must possess a surprising richness of body and a crisp, refreshing finish that makes it endlessly drinkable by the pint. That is the whole purpose of ordinary bitter, is that you could come in after work, have 2 or 3 pints, and still be able to walk home.
Dude, I love that concept, and I loved it whenever we'd visit the UK and especially London, and you're in the pub and just ordering cask ale and just drinking 3, 4, maybe even 5, and still just enjoying it with your food, and it's absolutely amazing. Now, some notable commercials example are Fuller's Chiswick Bitter, which I haven't had as much of the Fuller's Chiswick as I've had, say, Fuller's London Pride, but still solid beer. I think I've had it a few times. Timothy Taylor's Boltmaker, Brexbeer, Gravity, and Young's Bitter. All of those would be notable commercial examples according to the BJCP.
Yeah, I've had all but the Brexbeer one, or Brexpeer or whatever, and they're all excellent. They all taste different. I mean, that's the beautiful thing about bitter in general to me, is that you can really get away with a pretty wide variety of a range of flavor and aroma profiles, yet still have this traditionally flavored English bitter, which I think is great. So ordinary bitter is one of those styles that I'm not sure, tops many people's lists of favorites, but it is always great to have on tap regardless of the occasion. Every time I brew one, which I will be doing sometime in the next year, I promise, it somehow disappears within a week or so. I think a part of that is the low ABV. Well, Will, you tried your hand at making one using a short and shoddy approach, which you served to blind tasters for evaluation. We're going to be getting into those results when we're back from this break.
We all know that designing recipes is really fun, and doing it well is so much easier with good software. We at Brülosophy recently made the switch to Brewfather, and honestly, y'all, we could not be happier. Brewfather utilizes the latest technology to bring you the most robust cloud-based recipe design software that can be accessed anywhere, on your phone, tablet, desktop, and even offline. It also works seamlessly with numerous third-party devices to make it easier to monitor every step of your brew. I know change can be difficult, but trust me when I say you need to go to brewfather.app today to try it out for yourself. That's brewfather.app.
Hey, want a cookie? Oh, I know you just ate, so you're craving something a little sweet. Besides, one cookie isn't gonna kill you. How about half? Just a bite? Bite it. Bite it. Bite it.
Food noise isn't fair, but Mochi Health is. Your affordable GLP-1 source that puts you on a path to successful weight loss by quieting food noise.
Bite it.
Shh. Learn more at joinmochi.com. Mochi members have access to licensed physicians and nutritionists. Results may vary.
I feel like I say this whenever I'm talking about classic British ale, and it's certainly not meant to be pejorative by any means, but Ordinary Bitter isn't really widely viewed as a difficult style to brew, at least when compared to styles like Munich Helles or Flemish Red Ale. Still, there are certain, quote, rules brewers are expected to follow in order to avoid undesirable characteristics, rules that you threw in the trash bin for a recent batch that you brewed, Will.
Always throwing them in the trash bin. That's my motif. Dumpster fire for sure. I made a batch of short and shoddy ordinary bitter. I just took a full volume of 5 gallons, 19-liter batch. I did it in my Delta Brewing Systems all in one. I started my brew day at about 3:06 p.m. I just collected the full volume of, I went and bought some RO water from a local spot and then added some gypsum and things to it so I could get a sulfate of 145 ppm and then chloride of 74.
So about 2 to 1, not too far off from that. I think that's fair for this style. That's what I target when I'm making any style of British beer. Most styles, in fact, I go higher sulfate than chloride. It's just what I like. So you started this batch at 3:06 p.m.
And keep in mind, my Delta all-in-ones are 120 volt units. They're not 220 or anything crazy. So just keep in mind that as we go through this. So
that's what I was going to point out, is that you're using 120 volt all-in-one systems and full volume for the most part, right?
Right. I usually do a nose sparge, especially with lower ABV stuff. So while the water is heating up, I weighed out and milled the grain. Grain bill was pretty straightforward, 84% Maris Otter, as it should be. Right around 5% of C80, 5% of C60, a little bit of Caravina just so I could, span over into some other malt that I had, and then 1% of pale chocolate just for a little bit of color adjustment.
Well, and I would say that 1% of pale chocolate, which in this recipe meant just 2 ounces, I believe, of pale chocolate malt, that will absolutely, in my experience, contribute that nuttiness that I love so much in these styles of beers. And to me, it is the easiest way to achieve. It's kind of like amplifying what you're already going to get from the Maris Otter, but it also adds color as well. So I would ditch the Caravine because I'm not a big fan of those caramalts, but everything else, I'm loving it.
Well, I feel like there's not a lot of, caramel malt is kind of the key component of adding a little bit of a wrinkle. And so if you can kind of span the range of different, kilning levels of the caramel malts, I feel like you can kind of get, maybe coax a little bit of different flavor out of it. So just taking advantage of one of the levers I had. So when the water was at strike temperature, I integrated my grains and I adjusted my mash temperature to 154 Fahrenheit or 68 C. And I intentionally did 154 because when you're doing these short and shotties, you're not doing it you're doing it in a truncated time frame. And I wanted to make sure, one, that even if I overshot a little bit, I could still keep that kind of a little bit of body in there. So I didn't want this thing to dry out too bad. I still wanted that body of an English beer inside of it. So I went for a little bit higher mash temperature there. And then I didn't mash it for just 30 minutes before the grains were removed. So easy peasy.
Easy peasy. 154 also, I forget who said it, but several years ago, there was some, we'll put evidence influenced commentary that 154 is kind of the sweet spot in terms of both the alpha and beta amylase. They're both at work. Neither of them are necessarily favored, but they both do their thing, and you kind of get the best of both worlds. I don't know. I thought maybe that was why you picked it, but regardless, 154 is great for a lower ABV style as well, because one, you're not going to, overly attenuate it, which a lot of people fear could lead to, a thinness, a lack of flavor. But also it's going to keep that ABV lower than if you were to mash it cooler. So works for me.
Yeah, I usually just default to 152 for whatever reason. So that's just kind of what I do. But yeah, and then I heat it up to boiling temperature, boiling water, and boiled it for 30 minutes. I did 30 grams of Target at the start of a boil for 30 minutes, and then in the last couple of minutes of the boil, I added 30 grams of Fuggle. Target, nice UK hop. It has higher alpha acidity than, say, Fuggle does, because I think I had a 10.3% alpha acid versus a 4.3 in the Fuggle. And so it just made sense to me to use something with a little higher alpha acidity to do your bittering on this one. Otherwise, I'd be adding a ton of Fuggle, and I don't want to do that.
Yeah, and that's actually something that I've started thinking about. I started thinking about a while ago as well, is with these short and shoddy ones, you have to use more hops no matter what, regardless of the variety you're picking. If it's the same exact hop variety, you're using more of them for a abbreviated boil than you would for a normal length boil. Is there something that we get out of flavor-wise, adding more of a lower alpha acid hop, at the 30-minute mark in the context of this boil, than if you were to add less of it at 60 minutes? I don't know. I mean, the old school way of thinking was that at 60 minutes, that's your bitterness. At 30 minutes, that's your flavor, and anything under 15 minutes is your all aroma. But we know now that they all contribute to all of those in their own ways. So, but yeah, Target being higher AA percent, you're at the very least, you're using less hops, in terms of weight. So,
yeah. And that's kind of more of the line I was thinking of. Could the Target have accentuated from fruity aspects of it? I don't know. I guess we'll have to go look and see if people could discern that here later in the data. And then once the boil was finished, I chilled and got my refractometer out, and I had a 1041 OG, which, is pretty darn close to where I needed to be, because I think 1039 is kind of the upper limit. It's 2 points off. But hey, when you're doing some of these abbreviated mash steps and abbreviated boils, 1041 is not bad, I don't think.
Hey, not only that, one, you were a bit higher than what the range that the BJCP defines, but again, bitter is bitter is bitter. I mean, we're going to hear about that here in a minute, but you still, on a 30-minute mash and a 30-minute boil, you still got a 60% brewhouse efficiency, which I think is pretty great when, typical for a no sparge on a 120-volt system like yours is about 68 to 70% if you're doing everything, by the book. So 60%, we're talking, maybe a pound more base malt is all that's required to kind of compensate for that drop in efficiency. Nothing that I'm worried about.
Yeah, and I also really like that. I find that when I specifically do these like lower gravity beers, like I've done a Lichtenheiner recently, and then this one as well, I do get a little bit better efficiency just because you have all that malt floating around and more solution. So I tend to get a little bit of an efficiency boost even on short and shoddy. So it is pretty cool. And then as we discussed earlier, my favorite yeast to use in these styles is A09 Pub, the fuller strain, and so that is exactly what I pitched a single pouch of.
And you did that at 5:42 p.m., which was just 2 hours and 36 minutes after you started this brew day. So, this is the beauty of short and shoddy. I know that it gets scoffed at by some, but it also gets embraced by those who just don't have the time to spend, 6 hours in their garage making a 5-gallon batch of beer when they've got other obligations like a family or work, stuff like that. To be able to knock this out with cleanup in less than 3 hours on a 120-volt system, I think is pretty badass.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, if you're knocking down your mash and your boil a half hour each, then you should be saving an hour on your brew day, which is exactly pretty much what I did right here, which is fantastic. Beers were fermented around 66F or 19C for 2 weeks, at which point signs of fermentation were completely absent. Sometimes I like to turn these around a little faster, but other times life gets in the way and you just kind of let it go for a little longer than you want to. But that's what happened here. I probably would have ended it in about a week instead, but life was happening. And then I got to take a hydrometer measurement and see that my final gravity was at 1012, with a nice, lovely 3.8% ABV.
Beautiful. I mean, can you complain? I can't. I would love that.
Well, the 3.8% got me right there at the high end of what the BJCP is. So that's a pretty nice little thing there that's going on there. After that, I cold crashed the beer overnight, transferred it to some CO2 purged kegs. Then I placed it on gas in my kegerator at about 30 psi for 24 hours. And then I reduced it down to serving pressure. And then after a week or two of conditioning, whenever I had some tasters lined up, we started evaluating it.
Heck yeah. All right. So I have a feeling we're both looking at the photo that's on the article. And you know, this beer looks beautiful. That color, I would call that kind of an orangish color. I know that has to do with lighting, but that's what I expect from a high Maris Otter with the malts that you use. That little bit of pale chocolate can really contribute this nice, beautiful kind of orangey color. It is a little bit hazy. Did you find this beer at all?
No, I didn't find it at all. I just kind of let it roll. Sometimes short and shoddy means you find it to make it look clear, and sometimes short and shoddy means you just let it be.
Yeah, and see what happens, right? It still looks great. It definitely doesn't look murky, and I think that's a point that I try to make with folks when it comes to any style of brewing, but especially short and shoddy look. If it's hazy because of your process, then yeah, you get a pass. If it's hazy because of lazy process and you're just not giving it enough time for the yeast to fully ferment, drop out, and get out of the way, I'm going to notice that the next morning, and I'm not going to be terribly pleased or excited to come back and drink another pint. That's all I'm saying. This one does not look like it has yeast haze as much as probably just some chill haze or maybe leftover protein haze.
Yeah, and again, I probably could have added some gelatin or something in there and really gotten it, or maybe I could have gotten my hands on some isinglass and really used that fish bladder to knock that out. But as it is, I was pretty happy with it. It wasn't. I think it cleared up after another like 2 or 3 weeks in the keg and got more to that homebrew clear kind of level. But sometimes things just don't clear out quite like you want them to, and I just wanted to see if that English yeast would kind of all flock out and do all of its thing on its own. But hey. While not as clear as I would have liked, I want to say that it had those biscuity, toasty notes and the aroma and flavor that I would have expected. And some of those light caramel flavors as well, and then kind of that moderate earthy bitterness to go with it. So as for me and my drinking, a 3.8% crusher like this was not wasted. It was delicious.
So we're gonna get into the blind taster ratings, but would you say that this, you having visited England as many times as you have, you've definitely had your fair share of bitter. Was this a good example of it? Did it fit the profile that the BJCP lays out?
I don't know that it was quite the Fuller's Chiswick bitter, but it was a pretty close stab at it, and so it checked a lot of the boxes for me that I'm looking for in a bitter.
Good. That's awesome. Now, you are just the brewer, of course, and we tend to be our own, worst critics, is at least my experience in this hobby. So who knows? But we did serve this to 20 blind tasters. Now, these tasters were informed of the style that was being brewed, and they were asked to evaluate it based on both any prior experiences they might have had with ordinary bitter, but we also give them the BJCP style description so that they have something to kind of anchor their evaluation to. So in terms of how hoppy, malty, and dry the beer was, tasters rated the strongest characteristic in your ordinary bitter brewed short and shoddy style as being its dryness, which yielded an average of about 2.8 out of 5. So even though it was the highest rated of the three, it still wasn't that highly rated. So it's not like this was a super dry beer, but for whatever reason, tasters kind of felt maybe it was a little bit more dry than it was malty. Malty got a rating of 2.4 out of 5, so not that far from the dryness, while hoppiness understandably was the lowest rated, but it was still average of 2.2 out of 5. So all of those within a 0.6 rating range. To me, it seems to indicate that this was actually a fairly well balanced beer in terms of that dryness, hoppiness, and malt character.
And that's what I was going to say is if you read the description again, there's a lot of balance that goes along in there. And so I would agree. Like this kind of just tells you that it wasn't overly dry, overly malty, overly hoppy. It just kind of was this level. Maybe preferred a little bit of dryness, which is what some people can perceive as bitterness as well. But just kind of a nice, well-rounded beer there, which is kind of what you want to go for, I think.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it kind of fits. I would have expected to see the malt rating a little bit higher, but, this is a lower alcohol beer, which tends to kind of be perceived as a little bit drier, maybe even a little thinner. So there is that. Now, after we ask them to do those more general ratings, we do ask them to break down the specific characteristics in all of those categories. So the first one we ask about is hop character. 5 out of the 20 tasters felt that fruity was the most prominent hop characteristics. 4 went with pine resinous. 3 each went with earthy and melon. 2 said floral, and then 1 each rated spicy and berry as being the most prominent hop characteristic. I mean, if anything, this just shows how subjective perception is, right? You would think that if one thing was the most prominent and out there, that a majority would all fall on that. Instead, we got a slight plurality on fruity, which are they even detecting hop character at that point? Is that not the esters? Is it not something else? It's difficult to really nail down, but in this case, there was kind of a nice spread. Nobody endorsed dank caddy or onion garlic, so that's a good thing.
Couldn't be perfect. Dang it. We were 2 away from being perfect. Come on, guys. Next time we'll be perfect. Yeah, I would have expected more earthy, although I guess Target could have given a touch of fruit. But I would expect more earthy ratings. But again, when you're talking about esters versus, hop, compounds, like it's hard to discern that when you're drinking a beer. So not that surprised.
Yeah, this could just be an indicator. We force people. This is a required rating that they have to do. If there's no hops in a beer, they would still have to pick something. We don't have a no hop character option. So, that could be a function of that as well. Now, as we move into the malt character, 7 of the tasters, so again, 7 out of 20, rated it as nutty. 5 people said cracker bread crust. So there's your majority right there, nutty and cracker bread crust. 4 people rated it as toasty. 3 people picked up a chocolate character, and then 1 each rated caramel, sweet, and roast. Yeah, to me, that makes sense. Those 3 main ones, right? Nutty, cracker bread crust, and toasty, all fit what I would expect for an ordinary bitter.
Yeah, that's kind of where again, you want the cracker bread crust, toasty, nutty. I'm all good with all of those. The kind of the chocolate and roast are a little bit surprising, but I don't know what they tasted that day, so who knows?
Who knows? Maybe they were eating a Hershey bar right before drinking this or something. In terms of yeast character or fermentation character, 10 out of the 20 people, so exactly half, felt that the ester character was what was driving it, the most prominent fermentation character. And that, again, I think about things maybe differently than others. That could be because they know that it's an ordinary bitter and that primed them to think that there were going to be esters there. So that's what they rated. Who knows? 4 people put phenolics, which makes 0 sense to me. I think that might be just that touch of pale chocolate adding a slight maybe roasty character that people associate with phenols. 3 people rated it as clean, and then 2 each rated sulfur and wild. Again, I think those are wild ratings, but I didn't taste this beer.
I don't think I ever picked up the wild sulfur characteristic. And I did submit this beer to a couple competitions. I don't think I ever got that as feedback. I mean, it did score in the low 40s typically. So I don't know where that came from either, but at least we were perfect.
You got one on every indicator there. In terms of off flavors, we just asked tasters on this survey, hey, here's a list of the most common off flavors, and it's a pretty extensive list. Do you check mark the ones that you are perceiving in this? They can also say none, and all but one person said none. So that to me is a good sign. That one person reported perceiving diacetyl or diacetyl. That's actually not necessarily out of style for this beer style, for an ordinary bitter. So I have to imagine with one person thinking that they perceived it, it could very well be that they're picking up, a sweet caramel character from the caramel malt. I am convinced that a lot of people think that flavor quality is actually diacetyl when it's not. It's supposed to be there. Or they're just very sensitive to diacetyl and picked up a hint of it. Then if that's the case, it's probably not to the point of being out of style. It's probably completely appropriate amount, but who knows?
Yeah, the last diacetyl bomb beer that I judged in a competition was straight up just like it tasted like going to the movie theater and getting a tub of popcorn. Ugh. Like seriously, like it tasted that. And so I know people say like kind of a toffee characteristic. I've never either. I'm not that sensitive to it, and it has to be a diacetyl bomb or something else. But I think some people always talk about having like a mouthfeel or a toffee or something, and I just wonder if there's something else going on in their head that's not quite there, or maybe maybe it's just something I can't perceive.
I like the idea that it's something going on in their head. You know what I do for a career here.
I know.
Well, after all of the characteristic ratings, we ask two of my more preferred questions, actually, the ones that I like the data from the most. And that is how well that beer that you made represents the style based on the BJCP description that we provide them. And then whether they liked the beer or not, independent of how well it represents the style. So it's always interesting to me when these two kind of contradict. They're a little bit different. But regardless, of the 20 people who sampled this beer, 2 of them felt it was a straight 5 out of 5, excellent example of ordinary bitter. Again, relative to the description that we provided them that was constructed by the BJCP. Another 12 gave it a 4 out of 5. So right there, you've got 14 of 16 tasters. That is 70% of tasters who are giving it a 4 or a 5 out of 5 in terms of how well it represents the style. 3 each rated it a 3 and a 2 out of 5. Nobody gave it a 1 out of 5. And one stickler gave you a 0 out of 5 in terms of how well it represents an ordinary bitter.
Probably whatever guy said wild probably would have said 0 there as well. That's all I'm saying. Like I'm just saying, if you thought it was wild, then it probably was an ordinary bitter. So that's fair if that's what you got. Who knows? Maybe it was the bottom of a bottle or something weird happening. I have no idea. But I'm pretty pleased with these results. To get 70% of the people saying it was a 4 or a 5 out of 5. That's pretty amazing. For me personally, I probably would have rated it more around a 4. Just like with the majority there, it was a very delicious beer. Was it the perfect Fuller's Chiswick's bitter? No, but it was pretty darn delicious, and I thought it was pretty good. So.
Well, and I think about this often particularly on these short and shoddy surveys where we have people rate how well they think it represents the style. I mean, what is that one person? If you were to line them all up, we don't share their data with, we don't ever attach names to it. It's all anonymous, whatever. But, if you were to take the group of the 20 people who sampled this beer and you're like, hey, you 14, step over here. You all thought it was a 4 out of 5. Why is that? Then you take the one person who gave it a 0 out of 5 and you're like, what were you thinking? I wonder if they would be embarrassed by that or if they'd be like proud of the fact that they were the one person who picked the 0 and like defend it. Who knows, but, interesting thought experiment for me anyways. In terms of preference, now again, this is independent from what they think about how well it matches the style. This is just, did you like this beer? Did you like drinking it? 5 out of the 20 people rated it a 5 out of 5. That is a quarter of the people felt that this was a beer that they just wanted to drink. I mean, that is the way that we describe it. If you love this beer, you want several pints of it, it's something you would like to have regularly, give it a 5 out of 5. That was 5 people. Another 9 people rated it a 4 out of 5. So there you go. Again, your 14 or your 70% are saying not only does this match the style description very well, I want to keep drinking it. I think that's awesome. And then this is where things get a little bit better for you here, Will, in terms of if you suspend or put a pin in the style representation and you just look at preference. Another 5 people, so another quarter of people, that's 19 total, rated it a 3 out of 5. And then you had no 1 out of 5. I think you had 1 2 out of 5, and then no 1 out of 5s or no 0 out of 5. So pretty good job there.
Yeah, again, I thought it was a really enjoyable beer, so I'm not surprised by this. If you like beer and beer-flavored beer, you probably like ordinary bitter. And honestly, I think there's a lot of people out there that are not familiar with the style, either due to a lack of exposure or maybe even bad PR choices by calling it ordinary bitter for all of eternity. And so I'm not really surprised by this. I think it is a great beer-flavored beer, and I really thoroughly enjoyed it as well.
Yeah, I mean, I just listening to the way you described it, and you're clearly approaching this from a position of humility. I mean, you're not bragging on your own brewing skills. This was a short and shoddy batch anyways. It's not like that's going to be what you hang your hat on. This just sounds like a really well done ordinary bitter, even if it didn't taste exactly like Timothy Taylor's or it didn't taste exactly like Fuller's. It tasted like Will's ordinary bitter. And the key here is that based on this data, 20 people tasting it, your short and shoddy approach yet again didn't seem to have any negative impact on the final outcome of this ordinary bitter. And it's just further, in my opinion, validates that this approach isn't what we thought it was going to be when we started out with the Short and Shoddy series. And it's probably going to be very helpful for those who just want to knock out a quick batch of beer.
Yeah, I would say overall, the main thing that the biggest, shortest, shoddiest shortcut we took in this whole process is we didn't do a cask conditioned version on a beer machine. I think that's really where one of my big hangups is with these English styles, is that I just envision them on cask. And when they're not, it's still good. It's just not perfect.
Yeah. But here's the great thing. There are so many clever little tricks that you can do to very easily emulate that cask experience. Will it match it perfectly? I don't think so, but it'll get close. Whether that is a super hard pour or using the syringe, like I talked about earlier, there are several ways to get close to that experience. Give it a go. This is such a delicious style. And if you happen to make one that has a little bit more alcohol than the BJCP says, just call it ESB or a best bitter, whatever you want. It doesn't really matter. Bitter is bitter is bitter. And that is the only comment that we're going to read today has to do with that. This guy named Chris Call says, I've been drinking bitter for over 45 years, and I had never heard of, quote, ordinary bitter until I came across the BJCP. I can honestly say that I've never heard anyone walk into a pub and ask for a pint of, quote, ordinary bitter. I know some landlords who would most likely throw you out if you did. It's just bitter or best. Another thing not to thank the BJCP for. What do you think there, Will?
So I'm kind of, I don't know. I do find it interesting because, again, when you walk into a pub in the UK, you're just ordering a pint of bitter. You're not ordering a best bitter, ordinary bitter, ESB. If you go to some breweries like Hogshead in Denver, then they will specify out best bitter, ESB, those kinds of things, because they're an American institution making British beers, even though they do a very lovely job at it. So I 100% agree with this, but I think this is just kind of like cataloging the fact the BJCP is there to catalog these beer styles, kind of encapsulate them, and I think sometimes we can turn things more than what they are. But the top end of ordinary bitter is 3.8%. So what's best bitter? 3.8 to 4.6%. So what's strong bitter? Well, it's 4.6 to 6.2%. So it's just kind of delineating mostly alcohol level, although there are some other flavor characteristics, but it's really just mostly going through and kind of delineating the strength of both the beer and both the flavor, the ABV typically, and maybe some of the backbone. So honestly, I think I was probably exposed to ESB first, and that's the one that I tend to gravitate towards. But if I just go up and order a bitter, I'm usually never disappointed.
Yeah, exactly. And, just my final words on this. The BJCP is doing a great thing. They are making it a lot more accessible to compete for people who like to brew different styles and win awards. By breaking down bitter into ordinary, best, and extra special bitter, all they're doing is giving you more opportunities to compete and win medals. So I don't see that as being a bad thing. I get where Chris is coming from, albeit a bit pedantic, but it doesn't really matter. If you're in England, you go to a pub, you're going to very quickly see that all you have to do is order a pint of bitter. You're going to get either an ordinary, best, or ESB, and that's perfectly fine. You may not even get it described to you in those ways. Bitter is bitter, and I think it's a beautiful style. If you haven't made it yet, try making one. That is all the time we've got for this episode. Don't forget to check out the killer content Martin is creating over at The Brülosophy Show, which you can subscribe to at youtube.com/@The Show. And don't forget, you can click the link in the description of this episode to read all about this short and shoddy ordinary bitter. The Brülosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brülosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brülosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brülosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey cause it soothes my throat. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go